Welcome back to the Deep Dive. You know we'd love to get your suggestions on where to go next, and this time you've sent us an article from The Conversation about a group called Lukurawa, yeah.
Yeah.
And we're going to deep dive into it to try to get a handle on who this group really is and why the Nigerian army might call them new. And what this all means for the region. You know, we're going to be exploring this fascinating world of terrorism and security challenges in Nigeria. And buckle up, because from what I've seen so far, this is going to be quite a ride.
Yeah, it's really interesting how this article kind of jumps right into this narrative about Lukurawa being a new terrorist group. It even quotes the Nigerian army, you know, calling them responsible for attacks on the Nigeria border.
Right.
But then just when you're getting settled into that idea, the article pulls the rug out from under us.
What do you mean?
Well, it goes on to highlight research suggesting Lukurawa has been around since at least 1999.
Wow, so not new at all, huh?
Nope, not even close.
So it seems like the Nigerian army might be trying to frame them as like a new problem.
Right.
But why?
That's the million-dollar question. And, you know, it raises some serious concerns about how information is presented and perhaps even manipulated to kind of control the narrative. Just imagine if this framing influences policy decisions. We could end up with ineffective strategies that are based on a false premise.
Oh, absolutely. That's a very good point.
Yeah.
It does make you think about, like, who benefits from portraying them as this new threat? Is it a way for the army to kind of deflect blame for the, you know, escalating violence? Like saying, hey, this is a brand new thing, so we're not responsible for what happened in the past?
Yeah, that's certainly possible.
Right.
But I think it's important not to jump to conclusions.
Sure.
Instead, let's focus on what we know about Lukurawa based on, you know, solid research.
Okay.
This article cites the work of a researcher named Murtala Ahmed Rufai, who's been studying them for a while now. And one thing that really jumps out is that they're herders.
Really?
Yeah.
That's unusual for a terror group, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Most groups we hear about, they come from, I don't know, like different backgrounds.
You don't typically associate herders with terrorism.
Right.
It challenges our preconceived notions of what a terrorist group looks like.
Sure.
Makes you wonder how their herder background influences their operations, you know, and tactics.
Yeah, absolutely.
They operate in these border communities, like between Niger and Nigeria, taking advantage of the porous borders and the kind of limited security presence there.
Right.
You know, imagine these vast stretches of land where the government's reach is weak.
I see.
It creates these pockets of opportunity, almost like vacuums, where groups like Lukurawa can just step in and exploit the situation.
You mean like ungoverned spaces?
Precisely. These ungoverned spaces are a global problem, not just limited to Nigeria.
Right.
Think of them as areas where the rule of law is weak.
Yeah.
And because of that, it's just rife with opportunities for criminal activity or insurgency. You know, it's a really complex issue with far-reaching consequences.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got ungoverned spaces, we've got herders turned terrorists. What else makes Lukurawa tick?
Well, the article calls them a unique group of terrorists.
Okay.
And for good reason.
Yeah.
It's not just their background as herders. They're also promoting a very distinct interpretation of Islam, which adds a whole other, you know, religious dimension to their activities.
Okay.
And get this, their aim is to establish a caliphate.
Hold on. A caliphate, like a whole Islamic state governed by Sharia law.
Exactly. That's a significant goal. And it actually connects them ideologically to other jihadist movements we see globally.
Wow.
It's no longer just about local grievances or control of territory.
Right.
It's about a much grander vision, you know, of reshaping society based on their beliefs.
This is starting to feel much bigger than just a local Nigerian problem.
You're absolutely right. To feel that way, it raises the stakes considerably and brings in a whole host of potential international implications.
Yeah.
We really need to consider the ripple effects this could have across the region and even beyond.
So we've established that they're not a new group, they're herders.
Right.
And they had this, like, pretty big ambition to establish a caliphate. It's already a lot to unpack. But before we get ahead of ourselves, I think we need to go back to basics.
Okay.
Who are Lukurawa, really? What do we know about their structure, their leadership, their recruitment methods?
That's a great point. We need to understand the group's inner workings to grasp the true nature of the threat.
Right.
You know, Rufai's research provides some clues.
Okay.
For instance, he points out that they have a history of marrying into local communities.
Oh.
Imagine that.
Yeah.
Embedding themselves within the very fabric of society.
It's a little creepy.
Yeah, it's a chilling reminder of how these groups can operate in such subtle and insidious ways.
It's almost like they're trying to, like, blend in, fly under the radar, while simultaneously building a base of support, and influence within those communities.
Yeah.
It's a very different approach than, like, what we might typically associate with a terrorist organization.
Absolutely. It suggests a more long-term strategy, one that's focused on gradual infiltration and indoctrination rather than brute force.
Right.
They're recruiting young people, instilling their ideology, slowly expanding their network.
This is getting really interesting.
Yeah.
It seems like they're playing a long game, embedding themselves within the local population and slowly gaining influence. But how do they manage to operate so freely? Where does the Nigerian government fit into all of this?
Well, that's where things get really interesting and perhaps a bit uncomfortable.
Okay.
The article argues that Lukurawa's existence is a symptom of the Nigerian government's failure to provide adequate security to its citizens. They're saying the government created this vacuum and Lukurawa stepped in to fill it.
So it's like the government's inability to provide that basic security created an opportunity for Lukurawa to thrive.
Exactly.
And their herder background, their familiarity with the terrain probably gave them an advantage in, like, navigating these ungoverned spaces.
It's like a perfect storm, really. You have a population feeling neglected and vulnerable, a government struggling to, assert its authority. And then you have a group like Lukurawa ready to exploit the situation.
Yeah.
It's a recipe for instability and conflict.
This is heavy stuff.
Yeah.
But it's incredibly important to understand.
It is.
We're talking about real lives being impacted, real communities grappling with fear and uncertainty.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just a stark reminder of the human cost of these conflicts, and the urgent need for effective solutions.
You're absolutely right, It's easy to get caught up in all this geopolitical analysis and all that, but we should never forget that behind all the headlines are real people who are dealing with very real consequences.
Right.
Their voices need to be heard.
Yeah.
And their experiences really need to inform how we understand this whole situation.
So we've uncovered a lot about Lukurawa already.
We have.
Their origins, their goals, their methods.
Yeah.
And we've started to kind of touch upon the Nigerian government's role in all of this.
Right.
But there's still so much more to explore.
Absolutely.
We need to understand the broader regional context.
Yeah.
The role of neighboring countries and the potential for, like, international cooperation in addressing this really complex challenge.
Yeah, you're spot on. This is just the tip of the iceberg.
Right.
There's a whole lot more to unpack as we, dive deeper into the complexities of security, governance, and the search for, some lasting peace in the region. Yeah. One thing that really struck me in Rufai's research was the role of, like, local actors in Lukurawa's, formation.
Right.
These community leaders who initially invited them in to fight bandits, they had no idea they were unleashing this force they couldn't control.
It's almost Shakespearean, like a deal with the devil.
Totally.
They've been backfiring on them.
Yeah, they were desperate for help. And Lukurawa was right there offering a solution, but at what cost?
Right, yeah, it really highlights how these short-sighted solutions,
especially in complex security environments, can create these unintended consequences.
Yeah.
And it just underscores how important it is to really understand, local dynamics, for sure, solutions that are imposed from outside without taking into account the complexities on the ground are likely to fail.
It's like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. You can force it in, but it's just not going to work.
Right.
Speaking of context.
Yeah.
The article mentions the Sahel region quite a bit. Can you explain what's happening there and how it connects to all of this?
The Sahel region, which stretches across Africa, just south of the Sahara Desert, has been grappling with instability and insecurity for decades.
Wow.
It's a complex mix of poverty, climate change, weak governance, ethnic tensions.
Right.
All of this creates, like, fertile ground for groups like Lukurawa to exploit.
So it's not just a Nigerian problem.
Not at all.
Lukurawa is just one piece of a much larger...
Exactly. And the situation has been made even worse by recent coups in neighboring Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger.
Okay.
These coups have further weakened state capacity and created even more of those ungoverned spaces that we were talking about, allowing groups like Lukurawa to move more freely and expand their influence.
It's like a chain reaction. One event triggers another, leading to a cascade of instability that spreads across borders.
It's a domino effect, and it really highlights the interconnectedness of these security challenges in the region.
Yeah.
What happens in one country inevitably impacts its neighbors.
Right.
That's why regional cooperation is so crucial in tackling these shared threats.
Speaking of cooperation, the article mentions the need for Nigeria and his neighbors to work together to address these cross-border threats.
Yeah.
What does that look like in practice?
Right.
Is it just about sharing intelligence, or is there more to it?
It goes beyond just intelligence sharing. It's about coordinating security operations, harmonizing legal frameworks, establishing joint mechanisms for border control and conflict resolution.
I see.
Imagine a more integrated approach where countries are working together seamlessly to prevent the movement of militants, weapons, and illicit goods across their borders.
It sounds like a massive undertaking, especially given the existing political tensions and historical rivalries between some of these countries.
It's certainly a challenge, but it's not impossible.
Okay.
It starts with recognizing that security is a shared responsibility and that no country can effectively address these challenges in isolation.
Right.
It also requires political will and a commitment to dialogue, diplomacy, and confidence-building measures.
So it's about shifting the mindset from competition to collaboration.
Exactly.
From seeing each other as threats to recognizing the shared interests and common goals.
Absolutely. It's about building that sense of regional solidarity
Okay.
and recognizing that a threat to one is a threat to all.
Right.
And this collaboration needs to extend beyond just governments to include civil society organizations, local communities, and regional institutions.
That's a lot of moving parts.
It is.
But I guess that's the nature of these complex challenges.
It is. There's no easy fix or, one-size-fits-all solution.
Right.
It requires a multifaceted approach, one that combines security measures with development initiatives, political reforms, and efforts to address those root causes of conflict.
Right.
It's about breaking down silos and recognizing that security development and governance are all inextricably linked.
You've mentioned root causes a few times now.
All right.
Can you elaborate on what those are in this context?
In the Sahel, some of the key drivers of instability include widespread poverty, inequality, lack of access to education and healthcare, climate change, leading to resource scarcity, and the marginalization of certain ethnic groups. These factors create a sense of hopelessness and resentment, which makes people more susceptible to extremist ideologies and recruitment by groups like Lukurawa.
So it's not just about ideology. It's about addressing the underlying social and economic conditions that create fertile ground for extremism to thrive.
Precisely. Imagine a young person with no job prospects, no access to education, and they're living in a community that's ravaged by drought and conflict. It's not hard to see how someone in that situation might be lured by the promises of belonging, purpose, and even financial reward that are offered by groups like Lukurawa.
It's a stark reminder of the human dimension of these conflicts. We can't just focus on military solutions or counterterrorism strategies. We need to invest in people, in their well-being, and in their futures.
Absolutely. It's about shifting that focus from state security to human security.
I like that.
It's about creating a more just and equitable society where people have opportunities to thrive, where their voices are heard, and where they feel a sense of ownership over their own destinies.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the big picture, regional dynamics, cooperation, root causes. But let's zoom back in on Lukurawa.
Okay.
This article is pretty critical of the Nigerian army's approach, calling it reactive, and focused solely on military operations after attacks have already happened. Is that really the best strategy?
That's a great question, and it gets to the heart of the debate about the effectiveness of counterterrorism strategies. While military operations might be necessary to disrupt and degrade groups like Lukurawa, they are rarely sufficient on their own.
So it's not just about bombs and bullets.
No.
You need a more sophisticated approach
that
addresses the underlying drivers of conflict and seeks to prevent violence before it occurs.
Exactly. It's about understanding the enemy, their motivations, their tactics, and their support networks. It's about intelligence gathering, community engagement, targeted interventions aimed at disrupting their recruitment and financing mechanisms.
So it's about being proactive rather than reactive. It's about prevention rather than just response.
Precisely. And it's about recognizing that counterterrorism is not just a military endeavor. It requires a whole of government approach involving law enforcement, intelligence agencies, diplomats, development experts, and even, social workers. It's about building resilience within communities, countering those extremist ideologies, and addressing the grievances that fuel these conflicts.
It sounds like a massive undertaking, requiring coordination across multiple sectors and agencies. How do you even begin to implement such a complex strategy?
It starts with political will and a clear understanding of the threat. It requires investment in intelligence capabilities, training and equipping security forces, and building those partnerships with local communities. And it demands a long-term commitment, recognizing that this is not a battle that will be won overnight.
So it's about playing the long game.
Exactly.
It's about patience, persistence, and a recognition that success requires this, sustained and multifaceted effort.
Absolutely. There are no quick fixes in counterterrorism. It's about building trust, fostering resilience, and chipping away at those factors that allow groups like Lukurawa to thrive.
This deep dive is really highlighting the complexities of this situation. It's clear that we need to, move beyond these simplistic explanations. And acknowledge the multifaceted nature of the challenge.
Absolutely.
What does this mean for people on the ground? How are these communities, coping with this constant threat of violence and instability?
That's a crucial question, and one that deserves a lot more attention. We often focus on the perpetrators of violence, but we rarely hear the voices of those who are most affected by it.
The people living in these communities are the ones bearing the brunt of this conflict. They're the ones losing loved ones, being displaced from their homes, living in constant fear.
It's heartbreaking.
Their stories need to be heard, and their resilience needs to be recognized.
That's a really important point.
It is.
It's easy to get caught up in the geopolitical chess game and lose sight of the human cost of these conflicts.
Absolutely.
So how do we amplify those voices? How do we ensure that their experiences are informing, our understanding of the problem and the solutions that we propose?
It requires a shift in perspective. We need to move away from this top-down approach to security and development and embrace a more bottom-up, community-driven model. We need to listen to the people on the ground, understand their needs and priorities, and empower them to be agents of change in their own communities.
It sounds like it's about building partnerships, not just between states,
but also with the people most affected by these conflicts.
Precisely. It's about recognizing that lasting peace and security can only be achieved through these inclusive and collaborative efforts that address those root causes of instability and empower communities to build a better future.
This has been an incredibly insightful discussion.
It has.
We've covered a lot of ground, from the nuances of Lukurawa's ideology and tactics to the broader challenges of governance, security, and development in the region.
It's been a fascinating exploration, and I think it really highlights the importance of informed and nuanced analysis.
Absolutely.
When we're dealing with such complex issues like terrorism and insurgency.
We'll be back in a moment to wrap up our deep dive into the world of Lukurawa. And explore some potential pathways towards a more peaceful and secure future for the region. We've been talking a lot about the challenges, in the Sahel and the complexities of groups like Lukurawa. And it's clear there's no easy solution.
But the article does offer some potential pathways forward. It suggests empowering local communities and even considering state police as part of a more decentralized security approach. What are your thoughts on this?
It's an interesting idea.
Yeah.
And it's one that's actually gaining traction in a lot of conflict zones.
Yeah, okay.
The traditional top-down approach to security where the central government holds all the power often fails to address the unique needs and dynamics of local communities.
So the idea is to give communities more control over their own security.
Exactly.
But how does that work in practice?
Well, imagine communities having a direct say in how security is managed in their area.
Okay.
They could work closely with local police, share intelligence, identify potential threats, and even participate in conflict resolution mechanisms.
Nice.
It's about, shifting the balance of power and fostering a sense of ownership over security. But wouldn't that be kind of risky?
Whoa.
What's to stop these local security forces from just becoming another armed group or, falling prey to corruption?
It's a valid concern, and it's crucial to have safeguards in place.
Okay.
That's where strong oversight mechanisms, transparent recruitment processes, and robust training programs come in.
Yeah.
It's also about empowering civil society to hold these local security forces accountable.
So it's not just about handing over, guns and badges.
Exactly.
It's about building trust, establishing clear rules of engagement, and ensuring accountability at every level.
Precisely. And it's about recognizing that security is not just about military might.
Oh, okay.
It's about addressing those underlying social, economic, and political factors that drive conflict.
It's a more holistic approach, I guess. Recognizing that true security can only come from, within communities, not imposed from above. But what about the role of the Nigerian government? Can they really just cede control to local actors?
It requires a fundamental shift in thinking.
Okay.
The government needs to move away from seeing itself as the sole provider of security and embrace a more collaborative approach where they work in partnership with communities to build a shared vision of peace and stability.
It's about empowering communities, not controlling them.
Exactly.
It's about recognizing that those local actors often have a better understanding of the dynamics on the ground.
Yeah.
And it can play a vital role in preventing conflict and building peace.
Precisely. And the shift in thinking needs to go beyond just security.
Okay.
It needs to encompass all aspects of governance, from service delivery to political participation.
It's about creating a more inclusive and equitable society.
Yeah.
Where everyone feels like they have a stake in the system and a voice in shaping their own future.
You've got it. And that's the ultimate goal, isn't it?
Yeah.
To create a society where groups like Lukurawa just have no space to operate.
Right.
Where communities are resilient and empowered, and where peace and stability are not just aspirations, but lived realities.
This deep dive has been an incredible journey,
Yeah.
We've explored this complex world of terrorism and security challenges in Nigeria. Uncovered the, nuances of groups like Lukurawa. Delved into the intricacies of governance. Development. And the search for lasting peace. What are some key insights you think our listeners should take away from this conversation?
Well, first and foremost, we need to remember that there are no simple solutions to these complex problems, like terrorism and insurgency.
Okay.
It's crucial to move beyond, simplistic narratives and engage with the nuances of the situation.
So no more black and white thinking.
Exactly.
We need to kind of embrace the shades of gray. And recognize the multifaceted nature of these challenges.
Absolutely. Secondly, we need to constantly challenge assumptions and question narratives, especially those presented by those in power. As we saw with the Nigerian Army's portrayal of Lukurawa, information can be manipulated to serve particular agendas.
It's about being critical thinkers, asking tough questions and seeking out, diverse perspectives. We can't just accept everything we hear at face value.
Exactly. And lastly, we need to remember that lasting peace and security cannot be achieved through military might alone. It requires a holistic approach that addresses those root causes of conflict, empowers communities, and fosters, that inclusive governance.
It's about recognizing that security is not just about, guns and soldiers. It's about human rights, economic opportunity, social justice, and political participation. It's about creating a world where everyone feels safe, secure, and empowered to shape their own destiny.
Well said. It's been a pleasure exploring these complex issues with you.
Likewise, and to our listeners, we hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity.
Yeah?
And provided you with some valuable insights to ponder.
Absolutely.
Remember, knowledge is power. And understanding is the first step towards creating a more peaceful and just world.
Right.
Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep exploring.